Welcome to the fourth branch program. Glad you can make it. I am MD. This program is dedicated exclusively for those with common sense, a spirit of patriotism, and a determination for a more perfect union. Stay tuned as we begin the discussion of a very important, interesting, and enlightening topic. Hope to hear from you soon. Happy listening.
You cannot delete racism. It is like a cigarette. You cannot stop smoking unless you want to stop smoking. Same thing with racism. You see, racism isn't born, it is taught. Tyson Fury says that racism is a sign of ignorance. Ignorance is the biggest threat to any democracy. It is, however, the ignorance of the ignorance which represents the greatest danger to society. It is what turns an ignorant man into a lunatic. Thus lies the danger, the peril even of a man, a community, a state, a country, yes, even a society. John F. Kennedy, the 35th President of the United States, said that the ignorance of one voter in a democracy impairs the security of us all. Indeed, it does. We've seen it, have we not? We've witnessed it. We are all living it, are we not? All men are born ignorant. Many have chosen to stay and live in ignorance. Only a few recognize ignorance is indeed the root and stem of all evil and choose to be ignorant no more. Hello everyone, I am MD and this is the fourth branch program. First, a warning. This program is not suitable for all audiences. I repeat, the content of this program is not for everyone. To find out if it's suitable to you, answer the following two questions. Question 1. Would you entrust your teenage daughter to a non-rapist? Question 2. Would you have a non-pedophile cared for your toddler? Once again, question 1. Would you entrust your teenage daughter to a non-rapist? Question 2. Would you have a non-pedophile cared for your toddler? your time is up, obviously. If you had difficulty answering either question, this program is not for you. If you answer yes to either or to both questions, this program is definitely not for you. But if both of your answers are absolutely not, this program is catered exclusively to you. You should stick around. It is enlightening, educational, and informative. Join me here on the fourth branch at 10:30 a.m. every Saturday. And every weekday at 2 p.m. This is the fourth branch.
Common sense in a world of chaos.
This program will resume in just a moment.
Hello everyone, I am MD and you are on the fourth branch program. Today we continue the introduction on war on blacks. It is a topic we know is of extreme sensitivity. In fact, that's one reason we choose to make it a permanent part of our program. Prejudice, discrimination, racism, blacks live it daily. They experience it regularly. They witness it frequently. And they even pay with their lives every so often. Whites ignore it, shrug it off, condone it, nurture it, or even normalize it. We choose the expression war on blacks not lightly. You see, war is very costly. We know that. There is, however, a major difference between the expression war on blacks and war in general. We will get to that. We are in the introduction of this topic. As I mentioned in the past few days that I have been introducing the topic, we are starting from the general and we will get to the specifics, meaning we will not just talk about a particular subtopic without providing some sort of proof and references, because the goal is to bring awareness to the topic, but the main objective is to make it possible to talk about it, not just when a tragedy happened to a family, but to be able to talk about it on a regular basis. Then and only then we, as a society, will be able to eradicate the problem. We choose the expression war on blacks very carefully because we know what the expression means and we have plenty of references as to what war does, the kind of damage that war causes. We can take, for example, the last war that we got engaged into, the war in Iraq. according to a 2013 report, that war cost more than 134 million or thousand rather Iraqi civilian deaths. That was the number provided by very quickly, immediately after the war ended. But further study reviewed by at least 30 academic and experts put that number at 4 times the 134,000. We already know that we lost 4,300 soldiers, and the war cost the United States of America $2 trillion. That's in a sense. But if you factor interest and you factor time frame and you factor the cost that we are still paying for that war, it is estimated that by 2017, which is last year, it would have gone to $6 trillion. Yes, war are costly, devastating, damaging. It causes both physical, emotional, and psychological problems. So it is not very likely that we choose the expression war on blacks, and we intend to show that indeed all that has happened as well. The difference, however, between all those wars, those physical wars, and even wars of different nature, and a war on blacks, will make it really pretty obvious shortly. There was World War I, and we no longer talk about World War I except reading about it in history book. There was World War II. There was the Vietnam War. There was Civil War. There was the Kuwait War. There was the Iraq War. There was the war in Afghanistan. So many wars took place. And as mentioned earlier, all of those wars have caused a lot of damages. Soldiers killed, civilian casualties, and also, of course, wars are very expensive. We, the taxpayers, are still paying for the Iraq War. And as far as we can tell, it's going to be decades we will continue to pay for that war. Needless to point out that we accomplish absolutely nothing. That is almost always the case. That we go to war, we change lives. Those we did not destroy, we change them. We alter families. We leave behind a trail of tragedies. Physical, emotional, psychological. But one thing which is very common among all those wars, they had a beginning and they had an end. We no longer talk about World War II, are we? Of course not, because at some point there was an end to it. The Vietnam War ended. We only talk about it as a matter of history or to maybe talk about a particular aspect of that war. Even the closest one to us now, the war in Iraq, although it is a situation that's still ongoing, but it is just a residual of what the war was. For all purpose of conversation, the war has ended. The war on blacks is almost similar to a few other wars that we will bring forth shortly. But as you can see already, the parallel between wars, physical war against an enemy state, war against a group, enemy group, those wars, they tend to provide us with very quick measure of the casualties inflicted on the enemy. Of course, we have no way of knowing the emotional or the physical or the psychological casualty we leave behind, because we usually don't care. For instance, we went to Iraq, waged a war against a government. We only count those we could account for, and most of the time we minimize the casualties. But that's besides the point. What we usually don't account for is the emotional and the psychological damage we leave behind. And we always do. Plenty of damage. Because war in general is not just the physical damages that a country or a people experience. Well before, way after the war has ended, individuals will continue to suffer emotionally and psychologically. There are some, for instance, who lost their parents, who were not even part of the war. They just happened to be victims of the war. Little children left without parents, not because they were part of the war, not because they were soldiers, but rather because, well, they became victims of the war. A lot of that happened in Iraq. There were those who are separated from their families while fleeing danger zone and never reconnect with their families. Psychological, emotional damages. Despite it all, as far as any analysis of the war ended. Yes, the aftermath is a whole different story, but the war ended. There's the big difference between all types of war that we talk about and war on blacks. Why is it different? What makes it so different? When we return. I am MD, host of the Fourth Branch program, inviting you to join me every Saturday at 10:30 a.m. and every weekday at 2 p.m. for discussions of social, political issues and to dissect the meaning and the importance of current events, as well as to understand topics of legislations. The Fourth Branch Project is not associated with any political party, and we at the Fourth Branch do not have any political agenda or aspiration. Our ultimate objective is to work towards achieving a more perfect union by removing ignorance, the biggest obstacle to our democracy. Join me on our next social media broadcast. See you then. Lyndon Johnson, in an address that was that he gave in 1964, used the expression "war on poverty," and that was the beginning of program which had for goal, for objective, to lift people out of poverty. We did talk a little bit about that particular aspect during the time we were debating the welfare program. So if you're so interested in getting a little bit more information about that particular aspect, I strongly encourage you to visit the People Branch YouTube channel. That's the People Branch YouTube channel, information of which will also be provided to you at the end, at the bottom of the program. So the war on poverty was reached the executive branch, who chose to encourage the legislative branch to pass legislation and to allocate funds in order to combat poverty. And it was so coined war on poverty. Now, we still have poverty with us. That is a different story, and we can provide you really plenty of information to in analysis of why that war on poverty hasn't been won. And we're no longer talking about that. In fact, during the time we were debating the welfare program, we did mention that the Republican Party has been for the longest try to cut benefits for that could help the poor and instead do a tax cut for the large corporation and wealthy individuals. Again, this is widely debated, discussed on these archive on the People Branch YouTube channel. You'll find that under the welfare program. But as far as talk at the executive level or the legislative level, the war on poverty is no longer talked about. Later on, there was also a war on disease. Now, that particular war is unique because that war was pretty much, well, still is, pretty much waged by the medical and scientific societies, supported largely by governments. So it's not just here in the United States, it's across the world that there is a war on diseases, and especially those diseases that are contagious and that can spread pretty rapidly today with really the advent of technology. One person who is affected in one part of the world can easily be on another part of the world in a matter of a few hours. So the medical and the scientific society, of course, have been working very diligently as a matter of war on disease. Now, in the United States, there was also a war that was waged. It's called war on drugs. Now, this particular war came to light under the Richard Nixon administration. Now, there were a lot of factors that were provided by that administration in order to win the war on drugs, combating the addiction and try to have as many programs as possible in order to manage not only the addiction, but also in order to make the program readily available for those who fall victim of it. But there was one single aspect of the program which I would say law enforcement, or whether it was by sheer accident or because it was the easiest to use and show progress, that I'm not in any position to say. But there was one small aspect of the program that was seized upon, not only in the legislative branch, but also in the justice system. And that had to do with the fact that those who were pushing drugs, were caught pushing drugs, were to be arrested and criminalized. Now, I just mentioned that the whole program was not just about drug addiction, it was about the whole management of this problem. But that one aspect, which is to criminalize the distribution and the consumption, was almost manna from heaven for the justice system. And I said that because you're going to see very quickly that what that means. So when you hear the expression war on drugs, you can interchangeably say remove war on drugs to war on blacks. It may not be obvious yet to you, it will. I mentioned yesterday there are thousands of lives that are destroyed by the criminal justice system. And it's not by accident. It's not because those individuals at the justice system do not have any knowledge or intelligence to comprehend or understand. Because when the Richard Nixon administration put that program to be proposed, that program to be put in form of legislation to help those who are addicted to manage the process, all that we're talking about were swept to the side, except for one aspect, the criminalizing of the distribution and the consumption of drugs. Now, yesterday, I brought forth to the discussion the fact that on the street, two individuals walking, one will be stopped. It will almost always be the black individual. Stop, search, although it is a violation of that individual civil right, nevertheless, the individual will be searched. And if the law enforcement find a small packet of drug, whatever that is, cocaine, marijuana, that individual will be arrested, thrown in jail, lives destroyed for good. Now, the other individual that happened to pass through who go through the same path, who have the same problem, which means he also has a small packet of drug, cocaine, marijuana, but that individual was never stopped. Went about his merry way. That individual life is completely destroyed, and it happened to be black. And that example I just gave you is not just an accident. It is a systemic, a structure set in place by the justice system. And it is easy, as I mentioned yesterday, the reason that we're still talking about blacks being shot, executed by cops, and nothing happened, it's because it's not the frequency at which those blacks are being victimized do not happen to white. Now, it's not an accident. It's a conscious decision made by a society to make certain that they can continue to do what they do, because there will be very little pushback or very little effort done by legislators or anyone in control of the government to do anything, because, you know, it's blacks. Now, imagine for 1 second those individuals being picked up on the street were both blacks and white at the rate that they pick up blacks. Imagine for 1 second that were the case. There would have been an outrage in our society, outcry. Why are we taking our young kids and putting them in jail and destroying their lives? That would have been the outcry. That would have been the outrage. Because remember, the possession of drug has been criminalized. Just a small packet. I'm not here defending the use of drug. As I mentioned yesterday, I never used drugs in my life. But the logic, the common sense behind the very idea of stopping a kid, a young guy, a young man, and destroy that young man's life because he is in possession of a small packet of drug for individual consumption, and that guy, that man, that black man life is completely destroyed, because once put in jail, now that individual has a record, criminal record. And that's why you hear, and I started to tell the story the other day about while in school getting my journalism degree, that there were quite a few whites that were making the point about so many black criminals. Now, the irony of things is there are a lot of those blacks that are on record as being criminals, because the possession of drugs is criminal. We're not talking about drugs to be distributed here, because I don't want anybody to come and I've already get quite a few of individuals already gave me a piece of their mind discussing this very topic, which I understand is a very sensitive topic, but necessary to be discussed, because there is a widespread ignorance, especially in the white circle, because they not interfacing with what blacks interface in daily lives. So they have a tendency to think, well, those people are always talking something, that why don't they just behave? I heard it all. So it is something that blacks do live on a daily basis. They live it, they experience it, they witness it, and some of them pay with their own lives because of this very problem. Now, in the example I just gave you, if you had those two individuals, a black and a white, both of them were being stopped at the rate, at the space that blacks were being picked up by law enforcement and have their lives destroyed and put in jail and being called criminal just for the simple reason that they were in possession of a small packet of drug for individual consumption. If that were the case, it is a guarantee that we as a society would have been outraged by such practice. How could the government destroy our young life that way? How could that happen? Why would the government criminalize the possession of an individual packet of drug? Yes, we can all agree. I don't have any argument about the fact that personally I couldn't care less if drug were to be banished from the country. I don't have a stake in it either way. Banish, accepted, legal, I don't have a stake in it. So I would be fine either way. The discussion is not about that. It's the fact that two individuals, and those are not stories that concocted out of my imagination. Two individuals, I personally witnessed conversation of blacks and white sitting together and concocting and planning rather to go to a store to steal. Both black and white. But it is a guarantee they both go to the store. The black will be stopped, the white will just walk right past through. This is a systemic problem in our society, and which unfortunately that most whites would want to believe that's not the case. That's, well, it's just blacks, because that's what's on record, that most blacks are caught and most blacks are recorded as criminal for having been in possession of a small packet of drugs. Now, it's not because blacks were the only groups doing it. In fact, it was equally or even more so done by whites. But the difference is when individuals are being stopped on the street, it's the blacks that stop, the white just go right through. So there is not enough record of that happening to white. That's why I said maybe it was a conscious decision by society, by law enforcement, because it's easy for them to justify the money that's needed to do war on drugs by showing that there is progress being done. Because all that's needed is numbers. The past week, we have caught 10 people with drugs. Almost a guarantee, 9. If it's a week that blacks are lucky, you say 8 out of those are blacks. And it is done that way by the system. And that's the reason the war on blacks has become a permanent thing in our society. Because you don't have to be a genius to figure that much out. That if indeed white were being stopped at the same rate as black were being stopped, our society would have been outraged at the fact that those individuals are stopped for just possessing a small individual packet of drug, and their lives are destroyed completely. But because it was overwhelmingly blacks, hey, that's good job law enforcement were doing. And society, they're just fine with that. In fact, prejudice, discrimination, and racism make it such that when you keep taking those young black men and put them in jail, the white society is happy because those are criminals being ridden of our society. Nowhere is it talk about that those are lives that are being destroyed for no reason. Again, as I said, if you put the whites as part of that campaign that law enforcement was doing, our society would have been outraged, and for good reason, because it just makes absolutely no sense that all those young individuals would be put in jail and have their lives destroyed. They go to school, they are most of the time high school students, but their lives stop, they go to jail, and even when released, life is different. It happened to become a permanent affair because the idea of war on drugs have taken it would be politically incorrect for those politicians and law enforcement to say it's a war on blacks, because gee, our society cannot accept those kind of conversation, those kind of expression. But it is indeed a war on blacks, because it has targeted blacks almost exclusively. One individual the other day sent me some kind of warning that I will be reported for talking about this. And automatically I realized that, gee, I just found at least one individual who would also be fighting the civil war on the side of those who want to keep slaves around. Because that's just the way it has always been. Those very people who don't want to talk, who only say, when a tragedy happens, a black get executed by a cop on the street, suddenly they get as expert and say, let's talk about race because we need to talk about it because, we haven't talked about it much. And that's the reason those things keep happening. A couple of days, no talk. And that was the very reason, because it helps to just crush the conversation until the next execution. Public execution at that. Now, as I mentioned before, the subject is very sensitive because there are millions of whites who do not share the ideals of those who want to keep blacks suppressed, who want to keep blacks in, quote, their place. And I also even mentioned that even beyond slavery, white their lives were in jeopardy, being threatened because they were defending the injustice or abuse done to blacks. So that's what makes the discussion of the topic so difficult, because we are well aware that not all whites fall into the same category. In fact, I may have mentioned it before, there are 4 categories, 4 groups of whites in the country. And we will discuss those 4 groups to show you why we are still talking about a war on blacks. Now, this is not something that happened in this corner or that corner. And I mentioned that yesterday because if you take a look, you don't have to be black for you to realize that, because even whites who are conscious of this very predicament, they fall victim of that same problem. Because if they go to a job interview, they get the job, they are qualified. Now, a black goes to that same job interview, probably could be even more qualified, could have even more education, didn't get the job. Of course, what comes to mind is, well, maybe you weren't qualified. So it is a systemic thing. It's a systemic problem that permeates our society. We go about our business. We don't worry about the person next door, or the other individual, or the other group, or the other race, because everything works for you, so why should you care? It so happened here in the United States of America, the war on black is a permanent affair. Most demographics use blacks as a stepping stone to get to higher ground. No matter which aspect of life you take, you will notice that's the case. The individual that's going to run, that's going to apply or run a campaign as Attorney General used to be that police officer or that chief of police who have put so many people behind bars and campaigning on that. But the part that's missing in that conversation is the fact that all of those people, or most of those people, are blacks that were arrested sometime for very small issues like I just mentioned to you. The drugs have been criminalized, so you pick up an individual in possession of an individual consumption packet of drug, automatically check, score one. You just put a criminal behind bar. As far as the record is concerned, that individual that's behind bar is a criminal. Until you go and investigate and find out that that individual was in possession of a small packet of drug to consume, not to distribute, to consume. But because it is criminal to have that, then that individual is now in jail as a criminal. And there are plenty of those. Those individuals, more overwhelmingly blacks, have their lives destroyed by our system, by our society. And those are the same individuals that the whites that already either don't care about black, couldn't care about it, discriminate, or prejudice, they are so happy that they put all those criminals behind bars. So it is not just something that happened by accident. Our system, the system here, our system is structured to destroy the lives of blacks. Not by accident, it is structured that way. Now, example, the possession of drugs is criminal. Now, you would say, oh, everybody is in trouble, right? Because once you stop and found to have drug, then you become a criminal. You go to jail, right? But here's what comes to this differentiate between blacks and white. The whites are not stopped. And I would say, in all fairness, two things come into this behavior. One, the police officers already are either prejudiced, racist, so when the white comes through, We're not going to stop whites. Besides, we don't want to stop whites and find out that he too has to go to jail. But if we stop a black, one, we're okay with that. And two, even if we don't find drugs, and sometimes police plant drugs on blacks. And we know that because we have proof of it. As mentioned, we are talking general now, but we will get to specific when we start the conversation on a topic, on a subtopic by subtopic level. So even when they don't find that the individual has done anything wrong, for the sake of really making the quota, we do have to arrest a black. So they would plant something on their pocket, on their cars, because they do have to arrest. Remember the time we used to say, whenever a police officer, law enforcement does something on the street that's bad, we say a few bad apple. Remember those times? That was the time when there was no camera, no technology. Now it happens so frequently, I wonder if we can even talk about just a few bad apple. So the problem is systemic because our society makes it such. Everybody at position of power, the legislators in Washington or the legislator in your respective state, they have laws, they pass legislation that are overwhelmingly detrimental to blacks. It's war on blacks. The Department of Justice implement guideline policies that are overwhelmingly detrimental to blacks. War on blacks. So when the police officers are on the street looking for something, they stop mostly blacks. How are you going to find out that there are whites that also share the same problem when they very rarely get stopped? The reason we're talking about so many black criminals in the justice system is because most of those youngsters that had drugs in their possession were blacks because the whites weren't stopped. So the justice system say we have X% of criminals and Y percentage are black. But nobody really cares, especially whites. Why would they care? It's not there. Nobody cares to find out that most of those young people whose lives are being destroyed actually are in jail for very simple, small, stupid things like that. Lives destroyed. Yes, our society has been waging a war on blacks. There is no denying that, because regardless of where you look, that's the case. The legislators are the guys that really spend a lot of time talking gibberish, whether in Washington or in your respective state, and they come up with something brilliant. It so happened to be overwhelmingly detrimental to blacks. Now, the justice system implement rules, laws, guidelines that are overwhelmingly detrimental to blacks. Now, that is the government aspect. Now, on the private sector, it's easy to see it everywhere. As I mentioned in my example over and over, you go to apply for a job, you don't get it, not because you're not qualified. Now, one thing that when I was in the job market, I used to hate hearing from places that I apply for a job. When it is too obvious why I would not get the job, they say you overqualified. So there are so many ways to make certain that blacks, that's why even today that we're talking a low unemployment, 3.7, blacks are unemployment rate are almost twice as much. Yes, there is indeed a war on blacks. It permeates our society. Now, we know that there are groups who are simply completely ignorant of that very problem. They don't know because they're living in a bubble, so they cannot possibly understand, even figure out how that can possibly be. As I mentioned, there are 4 groups of whites, and when we talk about it, most likely tomorrow, we will show you that there is this huge disconnect. Yes, some of the war being waged on black is done on a conscious level. Now, the individual who happen to either do not know or live in some circle where that would not be of any understanding to those individuals, but those problems happen at higher level where the individual who could have done something about that problem actually contribute to exacerbate the problem. A black individual in front of a judge in a court for whatever problem will walk away with a harsher punishment for a white counterpart for the same problem. War on blacks. So it's not product of my imagination. Those are daily occurrence of life. Sometimes it's so second nature that it's impossible for the individual to realize that, would I have done the same thing? Has it been a white individual? Because it's second nature. Those are the kind of things that happen. You don't even think about it. That's why Martin Luther King said that this subconscious, conscientious stupidity, ignorance that you have, that it is actually detrimental to even to our democracy. Because you don't have to think about it. You've been ingrained, you have internalized it to a point that it makes perfect sense to you. This conversation is mostly for the individual who are in position that can help change the predicament, but choose not to, or choose to make it worse. You have folks, for instance, whenever something that happened to a black individual, if it's in a gray area, you'll find folks blaming the victim 1,000 times. All the program will go and drum the beat on the victim. If it's clear cut and the police officer or whoever is in the wrong, you will not even hear it at Fox. It will not even come. So those are groups that help to perpetuate or exacerbate the problem. They would be, if we were to be in the midst of a civil war, they would be on the side of those who want to keep slavery around, because the behavior is similar to it. If it's blacks, they bring people to bash the victim, like in the case of Trayvon Martin. You tune into Fox, well, Trayvon deserved to die. He's black after all. But when it's not that, when there is no gray area, you tune into Fox, you would never hear about the news. It doesn't exist. That's why individuals who watch Fox are so ignorant of what's going on, because they prevent those type of information from coming to them, so they always learn about when something happened and it can be a matter of debate, like in the case of Trayvon Martin. So yes, our society has been waging a war on blacks. It takes different form. So the difference between all the other wars we talked about and the war on blacks is the fact that all those wars started and ended. There was a beginning and an end. The war on blacks in America, unfortunately, seems to be a permanent war. And thus far, there has been casualties, plenty of casualties. And the reason we are not outraged is because, well, you guess it, it's blacks. Now, you may be quick to consider this conversation as, well, I don't know what you would consider it as, but from the reaction that I already got, it is pretty obvious to me that the idea when a black man is executed by a cop on the street, the idea of those of individuals who come are paraded on national TV and telling you we have to have a conversation about race in America, we know it's just pure baloney, just for the sake of talking. Because this is what this conversation is about. We will present subtopic, different aspect of how this war on blacks has been waged across the country in every corner of our society, and the purpose, as I mentioned at the top of the program, is trifold. Keep the conversation on the forefront, not after a black has been executed and then for people to come and say, oh, we should talk about race relation. We have been talking about race relation, except that it only happened on very specific time, just to taper everything, to crush the whole conversation, and to have nothing done about it. And that's the whole point, because the system is owned by the very individual who could do something about it. The networks, where would that conversation happen? Broadcasts, radios, papers, they own those venues. Now, there is one way they could have kept the conversation on the forefront, have a running series, whether it's on radio, on TV, or the newspaper, running column on the newspaper, could have done some of the job. But hey, it's blacks that are getting killed. In fact, one of the interesting things, I do not subscribe to African American or to people of color. It should be obvious by now, because I don't use those terms. You probably would hear them when I'm making reference to something. But me, I would not use that because it's almost as if it becomes ridiculous that we try to soften the problem by coming with different way of talking about it. It's war on drugs, not war on blacks. It's African American. It's people of color. I mean, give me a freaking break. Blacks, blacks. White, white. I do not subscribe to those terms that try to make it sound like, oh, it's better. You know, African American sounds better than black. I don't see the difference. Number one, and number two, I'm not sure exactly why the difference. Why use a different expression just to feel better? See how that would sound. Let me try to figure out war on African American. It doesn't sound right. War on people of color? Give me a break. There is a systemic problem in the country when it comes to race. There is no doubt about it. Not talking about it doesn't change it. In fact, not talking about it perpetuates the problem and exacerbate the problem, because day in, day out, week in, week out, month in, month out, we've seen that the problem continues decades after decades. And I'll give you one more example when we come back to show you how much our society has been guilty and accomplice of that very problem that we're talking about. Join me here on the fourth branch at 10:30 a.m. every Saturday. And every weekday at 2 p.m. This is the fourth branch.
Common sense in a world of chaos.
This program will resume in just a moment.
Don't go anywhere. The fourth branch program will return in just a moment.
After reading several books based on presidents and on Obama specifically, I found that they're typically partisan. The Obama legacy targets the heart of the issue by giving credit to the president where it's due, but definitely coming down hard on Obama on his bigger failures, like his handling of the Syrian crisis.
If you are in college, going to college, you are an educator, a faculty member, or someone with interest in government or politics, The Obama Legacy is definitely a book to read.
My professor recommended The Obama Legacy.
A friend actually recommended The Obama Legacy.
I would highly recommend this book for anyone, whether for academic use or leisure reading.
I would recommend this book to anyone out there searching for an impartial and unbiased look into Barack Obama's tenure as president.
I would definitely recommend this book as a good read for both liberals and conservatives.
So when I mentioned that the whole structure is set to make certain that the war on black continues, and as time goes by, of course, casualties keep piling up, which we will also bring forth on our subtopic discussion. A few days ago, I did mention that you have people, whether it's in government or in private sector, you have people in position that could actually work towards stamping down, eliminating, eradicating the whole problem. But instead, they do talk about, I'm not racist. If you ask any if you ask any white individual, are you racist? Are you prejudiced? Do you discriminate? Except for the few white nationalists and KKK who want to take the spotlight, the answer will be absolutely not. In fact, we know that for a fact because we did exactly that during the 2016 presidential election. We went and talked to various people, and there was not a single individual who would. Yes, some did hesitate, but the answer was ultimately absolutely not. And that's when the question comes. Now, if everybody that we talk to is not racist, is not prejudiced, doesn't discriminate, why do we have this problem in this country? Now, you could be quick to say, oh, it's just those white nationalists and those KKK. I would say absolutely not. Those are a very small number of people, fringe of our society. They do not, they not that spread out across our country to cause that problem in the country. Major organization across the country, you go to those places, you find the example I gave you about a black and a white come for an interview. The black gets rejected, not because the black is not qualified. In fact, as I mentioned, sometimes the black individual would have better education and sometimes better work experience, but the white would be picked. Now, on our government end, we have our legislators, and which is the saddest part of the conversation because they're the one, if you remember, there was the affirmative action that was passed as part of the Civil Rights Act that gave blacks a little bit of breathing room against all the type of discrimination. Because if a company thinks or believes that he or that the company may be sued, then they may adjust a few ways, and they have come up with ways. And I will talk about my own experience as well. So they will come up with few ways to discriminate. But the bottom line is, because of the act, then they had to do something. They do a little bit of going along, and they do a lot of discriminating. That's why you see most company would have on the website at the bottom the EEOO organization, Equal Employment Opportunity Organization. It's just there for a lot of those organizations. But to the matter at hand, the legislators who are in the best position to do something that would really start helping the process, because without affirmative action, we probably would have still be in the 1960s the way that things were then. So affirmative action did do some good for blacks. Now, today, we have legislators, if you were to ask them about their position in terms of discrimination or prejudice and racism, then they would swear up and down that not them. But a few days ago, this guy, Thomas Farr, was being pushed to become a federal judge by the Republican Party. Mitch McConnell wanted that guy to become the next federal judge. Now, a lot of things that done in Washington, we could call it politics. And in fact, that's what used as a cover for everything that the Republican leaders do that are bad. They use politics as a cover. That guy, Thomas Farr, has a record in North Carolina of preventing blacks from voting. Not something that's said behind a corner, but he has a record which is readily available for everyone to see. And that's the guy Mitch McConnell wants to place as a federal judge. So when I said to you that the system is set to wage war on blacks, it is not an exaggeration. This is what's happening at all levels, whether it's in government or in the private sector. He's a guy that Mitch McConnell, being the Senate leader, the minute that name came to him, would have said to whoever sent that name to him, the President of the United States, no, that name, we're not going to touch it because that guy is a racist. Oh, what am I talking about? It was said to Mitch McConnell by a racist, Donald Trump. Oh, I forgot. Mitch McConnell has to be a racist to go along with the idea of bringing not only to the floor, but also pushing to get that guy as a federal judge. But if you ask Mitch McConnell, he's not a racist. God forbid. How could we call Mitch McConnell a racist? The only reason that guy, by the way, is not a federal judge is because, one, Jeff Flake did draw a line in the sand not to vote for any nominee until and unless Mitch McConnell decide to draft legislation to protect Robert Mueller. Now, whether Jeff Flake would have voted for him or not, I have no way of saying. But all the other Republicans already voted for him. And the only other individual who did not is that black senator from South Carolina. His name escaped me. I didn't even bother to look. So it's Jeff Flake and that senator, black senator from South Carolina, that prevented Thomas Farr from becoming a federal judge. All Republicans, including the Senate leader, Mitch McConnell, voted to get him, to put him on the federal bench. That's not politics. Because it's not a surprise. It's not that they don't know. It's public record. Mitch McConnell got those information way ahead of time. So, yes, the system, our society, has made it a business to wage war on blacks every step of the way. The question is, what are we going to do about it? That's the big question. I do thank you to have taken the time to listen to this conversation. As mentioned earlier, it is a conversation that we are going to be having for quite some time, for quite a long time. We will debate various subtopics that provides proof, information about the war that's being waged on blacks in the United States. Now, as mentioned before, just as it was during the Civil War, there were a group that fought to keep slavery around, and the group was white, fully, completely white, wanted to keep slavery around. And on the other side, there were white and blacks that were fighting to end slavery. Today, we have the same predicament. There are millions of whites who still want to keep things the way they were, where blacks do not have any right. Blacks are treated like second-class citizens. Blacks are humiliated. And, of course, there are millions of whites who have taken a stand against those racists, those bigots, and those who practice discrimination. So there is a line in the sand, and it is between those who want to continue to live in the past and those who want to move the country forward. I want you to join me in the journey to restore equality in the United States. And if you have any problem doing so, I would ask you humbly to get out of the way. I thank you for watching. I hope you can join me again tomorrow when we continue this conversation about war on blacks. You have a good afternoon or a good evening, whichever it happened to be. I am MD, host of the 4th Branch program, inviting you to join me every Saturday at 10:30 a.m. and every weekday at 2 p.m. for discussions of social political issues and to dissect the meaning and the importance of current events, as well as to understand topics of legislations. The 4th Branch Project is not associated with any political party, and we at the 4th Branch do not have any political agenda or aspiration. Our ultimate objective is to work towards achieving a more perfect union by removing ignorance, the biggest obstacle to our democracy. Join me on our next social media broadcast. See you then.
The 4th Branch podcast is brought to you in collaboration with the People Branch publication, which can be found on the People Branch website, located at peoplebranch.org. That's peoplebranch.org. That's peoplebranch.org website, in which you will find a number of very interesting articles. My name is Mike Duchesne, MD for short. I hope you have a great afternoon or a great evening, whichever it happens to be. Hopefully you can join me again next time for another interesting episode of this podcast. That was the 4th Branch, live from New York. Good day.